Do you think the 911 hijackers knew that the WTC buildings would collapse? U.S. forces found a tape in November 21 that they released the transcript for in December 21. You can read an English transcript here: web.archive.org web 20,11,214,230,828 http. It includes predictions that were made of what the terrorists thought would happen, including bin Laden's himself. Inaudible. We calculated in advance the number of casualties from the enemy who would be killed based on the position of the tower. We calculated that the floors that would be hit would be 3 or 4 floors. I was the most optimistic of them all. Inaudible. Due to my experience in this field, I was thinking that the fire from the gas in the plane would melt the iron structure of the building and collapse the area where the plane hit, and all the floors above it only. This is all that we had hoped for. In other words, bin Laden thought they might reach every floor above where the plane hit on each tower, but not the collapse of the entire towers. 100. No, everyone was incredibly surprised that day when they did. If the hijackers had anticipated the physics of what would have happened, they would have hit the buildings as low as possible and after 9:00 a.m., as this would have resulted in tens of thousands of more deaths. In the North Tower, the first hit, no one above the floor where the airplane impacted survived, as all the staircases were severed. If Ada had hit a lower floor, and after 9:00 a.m. instead of 8:45 a.m., tens of thousands more would have assuredly died from that tower alone, and the tower also would have collapsed much sooner, and potentially toppled over, which would have caused even more deaths below. As others have noted, no, they didn't. I will add, as someone who was in Lower Manhattan at the time, that nobody in the public expected them to either. If that had been the expectation, police and fire crews would have begun cordoning off and evacuating the areas surrounding the towers. Businesses and residents would have left their premises. College classes weren't even cancelled. The original WTC attack in 1993 apparently was intended to knock one tower over completely into the other. Obviously that didn't happen. No building of that size had ever intentionally or unintentionally come down before 911, so no one knew for sure exactly what would happen. So my thought is that they didn't know or expect the towers to collapse in 2001, but did think it was possible. Here's an article from Wired magazine in 2001 describing the audio tape released by the Pentagon of bin Laden caught on tape, saying that all they hoped for was that the plane would destroy the area where the plane hit, and all floors above it. So no HTTPS. I don't know if they knew it would collapse, but I think they expected that to be a possibility. Because the big difference between 911 and previous high-rise fires is the collision itself. The steel columns of the twin towers were covered in fireproofing and rated to withstand several hours of fire. But during the crash, that fireproofing was physically smashed away, exposing the steel directly. And a normal structure fire wouldn't violently sever and destroy the water lines feeding the sprinkler systems, meaning you could expect some of the building's built-in fire protection system to keep working. But really, the fireproofing is the bigger thing. 'Cause in a high-rise fire there really isn't a lot of flammable material. If your office floor has enough wooden desks and carpet and paper to keep a fire going for an hour straight, well, then the columns that are coating in fire protection rated for 3 hours should do just fine. Pretty much no one expected the towers to collapse. Fairly early in the disaster, police were urging people to return to their offices and not to evacuate. They were doing that because the most similar disaster up to that point was the One Meridian fire in PA, which was a fully involved fire in an office building that killed a team of firefighters before burning itself out more or less uneventfully. If I recall correctly, in One Meridian, they just rebuilt the floors damaged by the fire. The sprinklers and fireproofing adequately contained the worst of the fire. A lot of things contributed to the WTC collapse, including improperly installed fire suppression materials, shoddy 1960 Death construction in general, and the fact that being hit by passenger jets isn't a failure condition that you can plan around. Several things that would have made a difference just didn't work. The firefighters and EMS on scene had radios, but the radios crapped out approaching the towers and were completely useless inside, preventing pivotal communications. Additionally, the sprinkler systems just didn't have the water pressure to handle all 3 buildings, and what water that did make it probably stop after the first building fell on the pipes. You know, it wasn't just fire. It also had something to do with the fact that 180 tons hit the support structure at a speed of over 200 miles per hour. Despite the apparent recording of bin Laden's expectation, there's previous statement from him after a car bomb damaged the foundation where he said, "If I had more money, the tower would fall," paraphrased. So, I'm surprised he said he didn't expect it. No, that was unexpected. And to all the conspiracy theorists out there, no, it was not a bombing that collapsed the buildings. When you've got fires creating temperatures of over 1000 F, that's going to compromise the structural integrity of the building. There was also an apartment building in Florida that collapsed in that pancake manner a few years ago, the Surfside condos. To say the WTC was a conspiracy, yeah, I'd have to say the Surfside condos was a conspiracy too. They just, simply put, could not hold themselves up with all that weight stacked on top of it when it was falling. No, I think they just wanted to wreak havoc and scare the shit out of everyone. They tried in the 90s to blow up one of the towers, so obviously it was their intention to destroy both. So if you take into consideration that Osama was a civil engineer and most of the other heads highly educated, then take that they had already hit the one tower with a van of explosives, I would say that the calculations were successful. They probably didn't care. They just wanted to penetrate US soil. For many decades, we thought we were protected from terrorist attacks due to being surrounded by a body of water. Osama bin Laden owned a construction company and he had an engineering degree. When the 1993 attempt to blow up the towers failed, I suspect they put a lot of effort into the plan. I studied the engineering of the towers in school before 9/11 and they were taught as a remarkable example of minimalist engineering. Did they know they'd collapse? No. Did they have reason to hope? Yes. This was talked about back when it was new. Bin Laden himself said it was, in their eyes, a happy accident as far as no one knew the buildings would actually collapse. The plan was merely crashing into them. No. I remember there was a video on the news of Osama and other AQ leaders sitting and talking about the attack and not expecting the buildings to collapse. Well, it wasn't the first attack on the towers, so they might have had some knowledge. That said, it was an act of terrorism. I don't think they cared. They wanted to be a signal for their viewpoints and cause us to fear being attacked. Their plan worked, and I think the loss of the towers would have been considered a bonus. No one expected them to collapse. I don't think anyone, including the architects and engineers, thought that the towers would collapse.